Welcome everyone to this amazing matchup between Vidit Gujrathi and Peter Svidler. The game has begun. It's 90 minutes plus 30 seconds increment plus an additional 30 minutes after 40 moves. This is the Maharashtra Chess Challenge where Vidit takes on Svidler in a match of 4 classical games, 4 rapid games and 8 blitz games. It's going to be very exciting. But for now, Vidit is not making his move. He's getting completely focused at the job on hand, and that's the reason why he's not played his move. He can go d4, he can go c4, he may even play e4, which he does sometimes. We'll have to wait and watch. And there you have it. After an initial quiet moment, Vidit opens the game with 1c4. It's the English opening and Peter Svidler has to decide how is he going to meet it. He plays his pawn up to e5. We have the reverse Sicilian. c4, e5, the main line of the English. And what is Vidit going to do here? He plays his pawn up to g3. Now generally in such positions you can put your knight on c3 or you can start off with g3. g3 is a very popular way to fianchetto your bishop. You can put it here on the long diagonal and the bishop is very well positioned. Black has many ways to meet it, but Peter's move d6 is not the most common. The most common lines are to bring your knight out to f6 or the knight to c6. Vidit brings his knight out to c3 and now Peter plays his pawn up to f5. Wow, this is an aggressive system. It is considered to be slightly inferior for black, but the interesting thing to note is that Arjun Erigaisi had played this same line against Peter Svidler at the Sigemen with the black pieces, and so Peter was white. He had won the game, but after the game I believe he really felt that Arjun's prep was nice, and that is what he decides to play. He goes bishop e7. Very interesting choice. The point is that if you take on e5 now, take, then after queen takes d8, you can take back with the bishop. Now Peter had played his knight to f3 against Arjun, but Vidit goes for bishop h3. Very interesting choice. Vidit knows a bit about this position. He knew that the bishop does not belong to the g2 square because later on this diagonal is going to be closed with the move pawn to e4. Peter goes knight a6. The knight is actually well positioned here, mainly because it can jump to c5 after d takes e5, d takes e5. Also, whenever required, black can go c6 and then put his knight back to c7 and then to e6, but Vidit takes the pawn on e5. He's ready to exchange the queens, which is a debatable decision because while on one hand white does have a slight lead in development, as we'll see in the game, on the other hand black is very solid. Peter instantly takes back the pawn and Vidit exchanges the queen on d8. Bishop takes back on d8 and Vidit brings his knight out to f3, attacking the pawn on e5. How do you defend this pawn? I guess it's very simple. You have to push it forward one step ahead and then the knight has to move. Peter thinking a bit, he's trying to figure out if pawn to e4 is forced. And after some deep thought, he does play his pawn up to e4. Now the knight on f3 has to move. You can either go to d4 or you can go to h4, but then the bishop could take and ruin your structure. The other idea is to go back to d2, but that would be very passive. So Vidit brings his knight to d4 and now the f5 pawn is attacked by the knight and the bishop. You need to defend it and Peter does so with g6. Look at this very nice pawn chain here on e4, f5, g6, h7, and black has a lot of space, but at the same time white's pieces are not hemmed in. They are well developed, and the knight is ready to jump. If you push it away with c5, then it can jump to b5, looking at the d6 squares. So Vidit can actually continue with his development, and he does so with bishop f4. If you notice, he has got all his minor pieces out, and next move he would love to long castle, connect his rooks. Meanwhile, what is the knight doing on a6? The bishop on c8, the bishop on d8, and Peter plays another pawn move. He plays his pawn up to c6. He is basically telling Vidit, I have confidence on my position. I am ready to play it slow here. And Vidit brings another piece into the game. He long castles. Now, almost each of Vidit's piece has been developed. Just the h1 rook is not developed, but it is clear that the side which is ahead in development must open up the position. That Vidit should do on the next move. But for now, Peter Svidler has to decide what his move is going to be. One of the common characteristics in this match is that one player often makes his move and gets up from the board and then moves around. There's a sofa there to sit, so they go and relax there. Now knight has come out to f6. You must decide what to do with white, and as we know, you must open up the position. How can you do that here? And it is pretty clear that the right way to open up the position is with f3. If you push your pawn up the board, black will have to take a decision with his e4 pawn, and if he takes, you take back, the e file is opened up, and the king is not very happy in the center. Also remember that if you do castle as black, let's just put these moves on the board. Oh, but by the way, Vidit has gone f3. You can bank on Vidit to make excellent positional moves. He has brilliant positional understanding, and he does so. He opens up the position. For Peter now, he must take, because if he plays knight c5, there is b4, knight e6, take, and then fe4 with this pin coming in to the equation. And so he takes here on f3, and Vidit instantly recaptures back. He takes f3. As we mentioned, rook can come to e1, and you want the e6 square to be controlled, because if you castle, the knight can jump to e6. So for that matter, it would be very prudent for Peter to put his king on f7. It just feels the right square for the king. It's well defended, and he plays his king up to f7. Now Vidit has to decide between bringing his rook to the center, and also there are some other interesting possibilities in here with stuff like g4 opening up. Later on, if you take, I take back, and the f file opens up to the king. But Vidit says it's not the position where I want to get so brave for the time being. I'll just bring my rook to e1, and we'll see what needs to be done. So rook h1 played, and now the best move is bishop c7, trade the bishops, knight takes c7. Black should be around even, white has a small edge. The other possibility is to bring your knight to c5, but then after bishop d6, knight e6, you don't trade the knights, you go back knight b3, and you have a small edge, because then later on you can push your pawn to c5. So Peter has to decide what is the way he wants to make some progress. You can see him in deep thought. This is the way in which Peter likes to think. He closes his eyes and he likes to go into that deep thinking mode. He goes bishop e7, and he says to himself that I want to control the b4 square, so that when the knight comes here and my opponent plays b4 and I move the knight, the b4 pawn would be hanging with the bishop. Very logical play. But now Vidit has a massive move here. Will he be able to find it? He takes his bottle in his hand. He's drinking some water. Has he spotted it? Guys, Look, what is the move here? It's a brilliant move that Vidit has up his sleeve. He's completely focused, and the move, by the way, here is pawn up to c5. And you might think I'm absolutely crazy. Why am I giving up this pawn? What is the reason behind it? Well, the point is that you want to clear the c4 square. Why do you want to clear it? Oh my goodness, Vidit finds it. He finds the move c5. This is an unbelievable move. It gives white a big advantage. And as Peter arrives, Vidit stares at him. He's like, have you seen this move before, Peter? What is your expression? Give me some hints. And I think it must have come as a big surprise to Peter Svidler. The main point here is to free up the c4 square for the bishop. You know how? The bishop's going to come from h3 to f1 to c4 and then hit the king. The king in the center is not going to be happy at all. c5 is such a powerful positional move. It says to your opponent, I am actually looking for the square more than material. That's how deep it is, and you can see there Peter Svidler completely immersed in thought. What to do? If he takes with the knight, there's bishop f1. If he takes with the bishop, there's still bishop f1. And yes, while the position is not over, it is definitely something to worry about. Let's see how he responds back, because he must take the pawn. Otherwise, Vidit anyway wants to play bishop f1. Well, Vidit could have started off with bishop f1 in this position, but then Peter could have gone knight c5, stopping the c pawn from advancing. And that's the reason why you first give up the pawn and then you bring the bishop. Okay, after much thought, Peter does take the pawn. He takes the pawn on c5 and asks Vidit to clarify what his idea is. Of course, Vidit comes back to the board and his idea is pretty clear. He wants to get this bishop, which is on h3, doing nothing, back to f1, and now the bishop is all ready to go here. Notice that how b5 is absolutely impossible because the c6 square and the c6 pawn is weak, so you can't even stop the bishop from coming there. Vidit is very happy with his position for sure, and Peter comes back now, taking a deep think about what to do. There are no easy choices here after bishop f1. White is clearly better. He's a pawn down. Rook e8 played by Peter, saying that, okay, even if you give me a check, I will tuck my king on g7 and I will ask you to prove your compensation. Yes, I don't have the e6 square anymore. Yes, you may want to take my knight and double up my pawns, but I'm still fighting. A pawn is what I've got for all my pains. Bishop c4 check. Vidit plays his bishop out there, gives a check, and the king on f7 has to move. So Peter comes back, and even before writing his move, he plays his king to g7. The question is, how should White continue his initiative here? That is a very important question. Do you go knight e6 check, but then he simply takes it? Well, Vidit has the answer to your question. He goes bishop to e5 and he tells Peter, my idea is pretty simple. I want to take here on f6, king f6, and then chop off this rook on e8, which is a free piece. Oof! What a defensive idea, knight c7. But isn't that a free piece? Well, the point here is that now the rook on e8 is defended, but if you were to take bishop c7, he would come here and take on d4. And what's the point after rook e8? Look, you can't take on d4 because e1 is hanging. And after rook e8, knight e8, I take on d4, my c7 bishop is hanging. So that's a brilliant bit of calculation here by Peter Svidler, bringing his knight on c7 tactically. And Vidit now needs to be calm. He cannot take on c7, but that at the same time he's a pawn down, so he would be naturally worried that, oh my god, I'm a pawn down, but my opponent has got his knight here. Next move he might even try to get to e6 to exchange more pieces. What am I supposed to do? Well, the point is, you need to breathe, you need to be calm, and you need to find the next best move in the position, and Vidit does it. What a move. He's found g4. Amazing move. His idea is to push forward with g5 and win the pinned knight. And notice, if you take on g4, I simply take on f6, king f6, rook e8, knight e8, and what's the move here? Check. It's a fork, and after the king moves, I pick up your bishop on c5. So that is the point of g4. You can't take this pawn because the e4 square would be under my control. And Peter now, in desperation, sacks the rook on e5 because g5 was such a massive threat and he would have lost an entire piece. So he had to get rid of that bishop. But Vidit now can simply take that rook back. He came back with some bar, like some chocolate bar that he's eating. Rook takes e5. He knows that the advantage is now getting decisive. It's a big one. Peter brings his knight back to d7, attacking the rook and also defending the bishop. It's one thing to get an advantage against world-class players like Svidler, and quite another to convert it. And Vidit does generally have issues in converting advantages. Will he manage to do that today is the big question. He brings his rook back to e1. Peter plays his knight to b6, attacking the bishop. And he tells Vidit that, look, if you play bishop b3, I'm going to take on g4 and win your pawn here. So that would be around equal then. What does Vidit do now? Even though he has one material, he has to be tremendously accurate here. And how do you continue? Vidit is touching his knight on d4. Is that the move he wants to play? Oh, there's a check on e6. He can trade a few pieces. And he does it. He brings his knight to e6, gives a check, and now there are more exchanges, because if you don't take it and move your king, then the c7 knight is hanging and the a8 rook is hanging, the c5 bishop is hanging, and so on. So he takes on e6 and Vidit takes back. It's the very, very simple rule that when ahead in material, you should trade pieces, and that's exactly what Vidit is doing. With every trade, he gets closer to a bigger advantage. It's king f6 played. Now the bishop on e6 is attacked. You have to move it back. And Vidit comes back to the board. Where does he move his bishop? I think there's only one place, which is to go back to b3. That seems like the right move. You should bring your bishop back to b3, and that is exactly what Vidit does. For Svidler, what are the trumps in his position? Well, not really, not much, because even though he may have the control of the d5 square, that is also excellently controlled by the white pieces. So he brings his rook to f8. And I guess somewhere his mind could be that he wants to take here, and then bring his king. But actually speaking, it's not even possible to take here, because if you take, there's a knight e4 check. And so Svidler goes h6, stopping g5 for the time being. You can't push because then you lose a pawn. And Vidit plays his pawn up to f4. Wow, what a move this is. Because you can't take on g4 because there's knight e4 check, and making use of this fact, he goes f4 with the idea next of pushing his pawn to g5, completely pushing black king behind, and then you will be gasping for air. The next idea could very well be to play knight a4 and trade even more pieces. He plays his rook up to e8. Well, the problem for black is that he doesn't want to trade pieces. But then what does he do? On the other hand, white's pieces are so well placed on the e and d files that they would simply run over black. g5 pawn pushed, and there's a check now to the black king. You can take on g5, or you can also move the king back. You can see from Peter's body language that he's already very unhappy. These last few moves are maybe out of inertia now, because king goes back to g7, and now Vidit can actually trade. He takes the rook, rook takes e8, Knight takes back, and you can move in with your rook to d8, attack the knight, threaten rook g8 check along with the support of the bishop. So there are many ideas there, and with it plays his rook to d8. He comes in, and now the b7 pawn is a weakness. The a7 pawn can be attacked. There are many ways to do it. Svidler goes knight to d6. And now, but the rook does not have. If you go rook g8 check, then there is king h7. And Vidit plays this extremely calm move, and he says, look, my two pieces are here, the rook is here. Why don't I get my king also into the game? It will be useful in the end game. What a nice move, by the way, king c2. The king is a powerful piece in the end game. That's a very well known thought, but players like Vidit actually implement such thoughts. And now Peter is quite dejected. He may even give up the game, but okay, there's still some fight left. You can continue, but what move should you play? You know, you don't want to move your knight here, because then this rook can come here and pick this up. You don't want to move your b6 knight, because there is rook d7 check. The bishop has really nowhere good to go, because the knight on d6 is hanging. And so he resigns. He gives up the game and he shakes his head. Peter says that was not a good game that he played. Vidit strikes first blood in the Maharashtra Chess Challenge, this match between Svidler and Vidit, and he wins this game. And not only does he win it, he gets 3 points, because each win in classical is worth 3 points. Rapid has 2 points and Blitz has 1. So this win has its weight in gold. What a great game by Vidit, actually, with all the amazing moves that he played. Kudos to Svidler that after the game ended, they moved outside and he analyzed it with Vidit. He's a gentleman and he will come back in the match.